Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Institute Saga 2 in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 16, New Faces. Clark watched as Jean ran past, leading the group of girls practicing their running, then he turned and almost effortlessly caught the baseball heading for him. Walking over, he handed it to the pitcher, who was staring at him in amazement, as were the rest of the players. Mr. Kent. Clark turned and saw Principal Kelly approaching along with another man. Walking over to the duo, he nodded in greeting to Kelly, then turned to the new arrival, noting his stocky build and smooth gait that bespoke quite a bit of physical training. Mr. Kent, we have finally found a full-time physical education teacher and part-time chemistry teacher. This is Hank McCoy. Dr. McCoy, meet Clark Kent, currently on loan to us from the Xavier Institute. How do you do? Hank smiled, extending his hand. Clark took it and easily matched Hank's grip as they shook hands. Good to meet you. If it helps, I have several folders of notes for various students. Clark said as they released their grips. Things like who excels at what, potential personality clashes, feuds and alliances, all those things. That would be useful. Hank nodded. Well, I still have work to do, so I'll let you get acquainted. Kelly said. Hank, don't worry about asking Clark for help, the Institute has offered to pay his costs if he is needed. Quite a few students at the Institute attend Bayville High. Clark explained. As such, we try to help out as much as we can. I even managed to negotiate a contract that has more than half the cost of electricity here, allowing the money to be used for other things. The donation that Mr. Xavier made last month has helped out quite a bit. Kelly added. He paid for the total refurbishment of the chemistry labs. Impressive. Hank noted. So, is this a standard games lesson? Jean Grey is leading the rest of the school's female football team on a run to increase their stamina. Clark started as Kelly walked off. Over there we have the baseball players practicing there. Clark stopped as Hank snagged the hurtling ball out of the air and returned it with a very powerful throw. I think you could give the pitchers some lessons. He joked and Hank grinned. Possibly, assuming their classroom grades are high enough. Erg. Alex groaned as he half sat, half fell onto one of the sofas. That training is brutal. Your accuracy is improving, though. Scott noted as he sat down opposite. Closing his eyes, he removed his visor and put his red shades on before opening his eyes again. Considering you don't have computer-assisted targeting like I do, you really are doing well. Alex nodded, then he leaned back and closed his eyes. Training to be an X-Man is hard. I know. Scott agreed, leaning back in his chair. It was hard before, but after Clark let us use the danger room, it went up a whole new level. Cyclops, could you please come to my office? Alex, I have to go. I'm on my way, Professor. Alex blinked, then his eyes widened as Xavier's mind voice spoke. Thank you, Scott. Whoa, was that Professor Charles Xavier? Scott nodded as he rose from his chair. I wonder what he wants. The one-eyed black man looked round as the visored teen stepped into the study. Cyclops. Fury. Scott replied, then he turned to face Charles. You summoned me? We have something for you. Xavier said. The mission that took the Avengers to Madagascar yielded some interesting results. Fury. Nick Fury nodded as his gaze passed across Superman, Cyclops, Colossus, and Jean Grey before coming to rest on Wolverine. Logan, this concerns you. The Madagascar base was apparently abandoned by Magneto almost 25 years ago for reasons unknown. Just over 2 decades ago, a splinter group of S.H.I.E.L.D. researchers took possession of the base as a place to hide. Over half of the researchers were linked to the super soldier program that gave you your bones and took your memory, and when you destroyed the program during your escape, they relocated to that base and picked up where they left off. I'm not going to like this, am I? Wolverine growled and Fury shook his head. They had samples of your DNA and decided to try and clone you. According to the interrogations we have conducted, the first half-dozen clones were pure clones which failed. They realized that your unadulterated healing abilities were incompatible with their cloning techniques, so they tried again with modified DNA, using samples from various sources. Although several clones proved to be theoretically viable, only one clone survived long enough to undergo assassination and infiltration training, the clone designated X-23. Although she doesn't have... Wait. Wolverine interrupted. She? How the hell did a clone of me end up female? One of the scientists used her DNA as a stabilizing agent. Fury explained. Anyway, she doesn't have your metal-covered skeleton, but she does have adamantium claws. 2 per hand and, for some reason, 1 per foot. Her healing factor is estimated to have a rate of 80% compared to yours, and her martial arts skills are very high. However, her mind has been programmed, and if she is to lead a normal life, the triggers need to be found and removed. That is why you are here, Jean. Xavier interjected. Between my telepathy and yours, as well as your empathic abilities, I believe that we can help this poor child. The scientists did something to her which caused her to go berserk. Fury added. Thor is still recovering from the injuries he sustained while Tony is rebuilding his Mark 47 suit. Even Banner didn't escape unscathed. Hulk's healing is faster than mine. Wolverine said in disbelief. I know, I've seen it. What the hell happened? He had to regrow several fingers, amongst other things. Fury explained, causing several winces. I would be very concerned about global security at this point had Kara not agreed to join the Avengers. She is strong enough to fill the temporary gaps. At the moment, she's watching over X-23 as the only one immune to her claws. Director Fury has asked that we take custody of X-23 and do what we can to undo her programming, giving her a chance at a real life. Xavier explained, then he glanced at Clark. What is it? You seem distracted. Well, Clark hedged, it's just that Forge, Peter, and myself were planning on reviving Connell in a few days. Connell? Fury asked curiously, and Superman nodded. He's the youngest of the stasis-held Kryptonians I was able to rescue, and, if our readings are correct, he's the one least affected by kryptonite poisoning. We think we can wake him, and if Jean then gives him English, we can give him a new life. I'm sure Kara would love to have another member of the House of El awake again. Another? Fury echoed. How many Kryptonians do you have on ice? Currently 8. Clark admitted, then his expression firmed at Fury's wide eye. Remember, Fury, you hold the means to halt us should we ever consider becoming a threat. You know it and we know it. After a moment, Nick exhaled and nodded. My apologies. It's just that the thought of 10 Kryptonians, all with your or Supergirl's power levels, if not for the kryptonite I control, I would be very worried about you trying to seize control of the Earth. So, back to what I was originally here for. Tomorrow, could you please pick up your newest patient from the Stark Tower? Of course. Scott said. Welcome to Stark Tower. A voice said as Superman touched down lightly on the small landing pad. Mr. Stark is waiting for you in the medical bay. Please take the elevator. Superman blinked several times. Thank you. Jarvis, sir. The voice responded, and Clark raised a quizzical eyebrow. You're an AI, aren't you? I am just a really very intelligent system, sir. Jarvis responded, and Clark hid a smirk at the acronym. Well, it's an honor to interact with you. Thank you, sir. Jarvis responded in a pleased tone. Your lift is waiting. Oh, Jarvis, Clark said as he stepped into the lift, I also have an AI system that goes by the name Fortress, a legacy from my time on Krypton. If you want, I can open a communication link between you both, as long as you don't try to take over. That would be appreciated, sir. Jarvis responded. I look forwards to discussions about the comparative programming intricacies bestowed upon us. Glad to oblige. Superman grinned as the lift descended. A quiet chime announced his arrival, and the door opened to a scene of bedlam. Superman's eyes widened, and he lunged forwards to grab the rampaging clawed girl. Grabbing her around the waist, he lifted her from the ground, ignoring the claws stabbing at and bouncing off his skin. Kara. She caught me by surprise. Supergirl admitted as she stepped forwards from the doorway she had been blocking. From behind her, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner peered through, while in the corner, Steve Rogers sat up, rubbing at his head. Thor slumped against one of the beds, his hammer held loosely in one hand as he rubbed at his bandaged side. Clark glanced at him, then he smiled. You haven't reopened any wounds. Thank you, last son of Krypton, that is good to know. And who be this warrior is clad in similar raiment to thee? My cousin, Kara. Clark smiled, his expression changing to a grin as Thor's eyes widened in shock. I found her and 8 others in stasis pods on Argo. We're planning on reviving the youngest of them soon. It'll be good to see Connell again. Kara smiled. I'll have to visit often. But doth thou not live with thine cousin? I recruited her for the Avengers. Steve said as he walked over to them. I meant to tell you, but you were still recovering. Then I greet you and welcome you, sister-in-arms. Thor declaimed before wincing and rubbing at his side again. Though perhaps some rest is called for. Superman, come to me before thou doth revive thine sleeping friend-to-be. I shall entreat EIR to aid thy endeavors, for amongst us all, she is the greatest in the arts of healing. Thank you. Clark said softly, and Thor smiled as he lay back down on his bed. Nay, thank me not. As I told thee, all of Asgard didst mourn thy race's passing. To see it rise anew wouldst bring joy to our hearts. Clark nodded, then turned his attention to the girl he was holding. She had given up on trying to stab him, but her eyes were still moving, showing that she was planning ways to escape. Well, let's get you to your new home. Jarvis, window please. Clark smiled as he rose into the air. The girl gasped as she felt her feet leave the ground. One of the floor-to-ceiling windows slid aside and Clark accelerated out of the tower, his burden held securely in his arms even as the Blackbird settled on the landing pad. So, what did you do with her? Xavier asked as Clark entered the study. I placed her in one of the smaller training rooms, put a sign out the front and locked it with my personal code. Clark said with a shrug, reaching over and tapping a few keys on Xavier's computer to open a window. Charles looked at the image and smiled at the sight of the girl sitting next to a small campfire, looking around in confusion. It's running a variant of the deserted island program. Clark explained. There's a cave formed by several rocks with a fresh water stream just outside and a hole suitable for if she needs to go. I also left quite a few ration kits and other foodstuffs in boxes. She can remain there as long as is needed without feeling like she is a prisoner. But doesn't she know that she's in a simulation? Nope. Clark grinned. I knocked her out on the way in, and by the time she woke up, she was already in there and alone. I figure that while she relaxes, you and Jean can use the opportunity to check out her mind for any programming. That is very thoughtful of you. Xavier said, still watching the screen. Letting her roam free while still keeping her confined without her realizing. I am uncertain whether to be impressed or worried by this. I'll pop in soon and try to talk to her. Clark noted. I'll want both you and Jean nightering while I do so, though. I'll wear an earbud so that you can direct the conversation if anything interesting shows up. Aha, she's found the radio. On the screen, X-23 was sat, almost entranced by the music. Chapter 17, Settling In. X-23 looked up as a shadow crossed the ground and her expression hardened as the blue-clad man landed lightly before her, a box in his hands. Good morning. Where am I? Safe. You don't need to know where at the moment. The man said. I am. Superman. Background, alien, Kryptonian. Flight capable. Enhanced strength. Enhanced speed. Damage resistant. Target priority high. Designation, threat. Instruction, kill on sight. Then why don't you? Superman asked and X-23 growled. Tried. Failed. Claws not work. No other weapons. Probability of success, negligible. Superman shrugged and placed the box on one of the rocks around the clearing. I brought you some supplies. Food, drink, cutlery, crockery, toiletries, and some new clothes. X-23 simply glared at him and Superman shrugged as he moved away from the container. I also included a communicator. Should you need anything, just call. Another glare was his answer and Superman rose into the air and vanished. After several minutes of scanning the now empty skies, X-23 sighed and moved to the box. Opening it carefully, she was rewarded with the sight of several smaller containers marked with breakfast, lunch, dinner, a folded dark jumpsuit and several bags containing various bottles and a toothbrush. With only a moment's hesitation, she reached for the breakfast box. "So, did you get anything interesting?" Clark asked as he entered the observation room. Xavier sighed as he leaned back in his new floating chair. "Quite a bit. I managed to scan most of her childhood memories. She was quite literally raised from birth to be a weapon. I caught a few images of a woman she trusted." Jean added, and Xavier nodded as he reviewed the memory that Jean sent him. "Ah yes, Professor Sarah Kinney. I had wondered where she disappeared to 15 years ago. Oh dear." Jean winced as she shared the memory. "Oh, that's not good. We need to find out what triggered her like that." "Like what?" Jean looked up at Clark, her eyes filled with tears. X-23 killed Professor Kinney in a fit of rage triggered by something. She had no control over it, it was like someone flipped a switch in her mind. "I'll send Fury a request for copies of any documents relating to her as soon as I reach my office," Xavier promised. "We may have to keep her confined longer than I had planned. I trust the door is secure. I set the lock to respond only to Q&A." Clark nodded. "Only Kara or myself can enter that room." "And X-23, she really needs a new name," Jean said, managing to sidetrack herself. "I mean, from a certain viewpoint she's Logan's daughter." "Logan, daughter. Laura. Could work." Clark nodded, then he glanced at the clock mounted on the wall. "Ah heck, I have somewhere I need to be. See you round." "Scott. Who's your new friend?" "Hey, Paul." Scott grinned, although part of him still mourned Paul's now forgotten negative reaction to the idea of mutants as opposed to other superhero types. "This is my long-lost and adopted by someone younger brother, Alex Masters. We're close enough in age that he had the option to test to be in the same classes as me, although he chose otherwise. I'm 11 months older than him." "No way, your brother?" Paul gasped even as he and Alex shook hands. "Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you as well, dude." Alex grinned. "Big bro's showing me round before we hit the classrooms. The science classrooms are really cool. The professor paid for them to be refurbished." Scott reminded him. "Do you really think that he'd settle for second best where education is concerned? Like the minibus?" Alex grinned, then he spotted Paul's look of incomprehension. "Enough of us go here that we need a bus rather than a van. Piotr generally drives it, he's a really nice guy." "Piotr?" Paul mused. "He's the one who looks like a bodybuilder, right?" "He's one of the Institute's men of steel." Alex joked. "Used to be a farmer. Lifting and toting bales of hay." Paul nodded. "I think the bell's about to ring, we need to get to our homeroom." "Men of steel," Scott whispered as Paul turned away and Alex looked at him as if he was crazy. "Clark." "Good point," Scott conceded. "Hey, Clark." "Hey, Hank. I heard you needed to have a games class covered while you take a science one." "Yup," Hank confirmed as he started to walk towards the school. "Principal Kelly is still looking for more people to provide cover. That's why I asked Piotr to help." Clark smiled and the Russian gave a nod of greeting. "Due to my other jobs, I won't always be available and Piotr is studying to become a physical trainer. He passed the first aid course with flying colors." "Good to meet you, Piotr. You really are a tall one, aren't you? We grow big in Mother Russia." Piotr rumbled with a slight smile. "I happy to help friend of Clark." "Don't let his speech fool you," Clark stage whispered. "He's more intelligent than he lets on. I think." Piotr glared at Clark, then snorted in amusement. "For Amerikansky with head in clouds, you okay?" Clark froze, completely unable to come up with a response to that, then he noticed Piotr smirking at him. "Okay, I deserved that." He sighed, "But you know that I will have to get you back for that. You too much Boy Scout for that." Piotr laughed. "Logan say so." "Oh, he did he?" Clark murmured, then he sighed again. Crazy Canuck is probably right about that. Why do I feel that I'm missing all the in-jokes? Hank asked rhetorically, and Clark stifled a laugh. Sorry. It's rather peaceful now that most of them are at school. Martha Kent smiled as she poured several cups of tea and passed them to the other adults at the table. May, how are you settling in? Very nicely, thank you. May Parker replied as she accepted her cup. The students are all quite polite and remarkably eager to learn. Peter seems very happy. I can understand barely one word in 10 that he and Forge swap, but they seem to understand each other. I don't think that I ever saw Peter so enthused before we moved here, and with me helping to look after other youngsters. I feel quite invigorated. The students respond well to you. Storm noted as she put down her cup and helped herself to one of the cookies in the center of the table. I've heard quite a few of them call you Aunt May. I know. May smiled. I quite like it. Even Logan respects you, and that is quite a feat. Charles noted, and May's smile dimmed. Logan and I crossed paths when I was younger, back when he was James. I've been able to tell him quite a bit about himself, before whatever happened to me took my memories. Logan said from the doorway. May helped me fill in a few of the gaps. I worked alongside Peter's parents for a while. If I'd remembered, I'd have tried to help after Peter was orphaned. Since I didn't. May rose from her seat and briefly placed a reassuring hand on Logan's shoulder before guiding him to a chair. Logan. Xavier said in greeting as the stocky man accepted a cup of tea. Chuck. Storm. Martha. So, James. Been doing some research. Putting together the fragments I remember or learned about from others like May, finally discovered my birth name, James Howlett. I'm older than we thought, Chuck. Born in 1882, but from the articles of my dad's death, he weren't my true pops. That was the groundskeeper and where I got the name Logan from. Much of what happened between then and now is gone, but at least we know that I can't call you old man anymore, even though I've still got more hair than you. Turns out that Sabretooth was also sired by dear old Pops and is just as old as I am. Difference is, he didn't have his memories erased. Explains why records show we fought alongside each other in World War II. Gonna have to check to see if we showed up on film. Sabretooth is your half-brother? Charles echoed and Logan nodded. Yup, checked with the fortress and a recorded sample of his DNA. Next time we fight, I'm gonna have it get his side of the story. Be nice to know what the hell I did when over the last century. You do have a surprising number of unusual skills. Charles acknowledged. And you worked with Peter's parents, small world. Yeah. Logan said as he took a cookie and bit into it. MMMPH, wonderful. Thank you. Martha said with a smile. It's nice to have so many appreciative mouths to feed. By the way, have you been keeping track of Laura? Logan nodded. She seems happy. I'd say leave her there for a while longer, at least until you and Red are sure you've got all the tripwires cut. That rage switch worries me. Any clue what triggers it? Unfortunately not. Xavier admitted. Jean is of the opinion that it's some sort of chemical since we found no sign of a trigger phrase or visual, but as for what it could be, there are just too many possibilities. At least she ain't out there killing people like my brother is. Logan growled. Okay, everyone here? Piotr asked, looking round at the students filling the minibus. Hey, where's Kurt? Kurt went ahead to get Amanda and jump her back to her house. Kitty sighed. He does that. Okay, all strapped in? We go. Piotr said as he started the engine. Carefully reversing out of the parking space, he maneuvered round a badly parked car. Faster. Hey, this not Russia, Ilyana. Piotr rumbled as Ilyana giggled. Here we obey rules of road. You're no fun, big brother. Ilyana pouted and several of the others laughed. Hey, I heard that Logan has a daughter. Is that true? Amara asked and Piotr nodded, his attention on avoiding the cars of the parents picking up their children. Yes, but she is assassin. Being kept separate until trained to not kill. You not go looking for her. Understand. A chorus of agreement was his answer and Piotr nodded. Good. Only Clark is one who goes in there, she can kill anyone else. She managed to hurt Thor, so none of you be more than practice for her. She hurt Thor. Roberto gasped and Piotr nodded again. Bloody hell. Language. Jean said as she turned in her seat to look at the other passengers. But yes, Laura is to be considered dangerous. We have her contained for now and are working to rehabilitate her. When she is ready, she'll join us. Until then, don't try to find her. You all got that? Another round of agreement was her answer and Jean sat back in her seat with a smile. Anything else? Piotr rumbled in amusement and Jean grinned before pointing imperiously. Jeeves. Piotr shook his head in resignation as the back of the minibus exploded into laughter. Kara. Hey, cousin. Kara grinned, giving Rogue a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Thought I'd visit and pick up the rest of my stuff and invite you to a sleepover at my new place. I have an entire apartment in Stark Tower. Just up the hall from mine. Steve Rogers said from behind her. How was school? It was okay. Rogue grinned. Y'all stayin' for dinner? Nothing would make me miss one of Aunt Martha's meals. Kara laughed. Anyway, I have to ask, how's it going with that girl we found in Madagascar? Laura. Rogue queried. Well, Big Bro placed her somewhere safe. Ah, Eric. Sinister smiled. You wished to see me? I did. Magneto ground out, holding out a transparent packet with a few strands of hair. My contact and shield managed to secure these. Superman lost a few strands in his fight with Squirrel Girl. It took my contact a while to replace them so that he would not be discovered. Sinister took the small packet almost reverently and, using a set of tweezers, transferred one of the hairs into a machine. Let's see what we have. Oh my. What? 4 genetic strands, dimensional subcomponent. Whatever Superman is, he was not born or created on Earth. Magneto froze. What? Oh, this is magnificent. Sinister purred as he manipulated the data on the screen. Such power, such potential. What are you talking about, Sinister? Oh, I am so sorry. It's quite simple, really. Superman is an alien. I wonder how many more like him there are. I only know of Supergirl at the moment. How fascinating. Magneto stared at him for a long moment. You mean, he isn't an enhanced human? He really is from another world. Oh, my, yes. Sinister smirked. Well, this will be quite a challenge. I've never worked with a dimensionally active 4-strand DNA. I guess that it should be Q&A, before. It will be a real learning experience. As long as I get my clone, Sinister. Of course. Sinister replied as Magneto left, closing the door behind him. I wonder if I can infuse this Q&A into DNA. If I can, my master will return stronger than ever. Chapter 18, Healing. The door-sized stone seemed to glow with an unearthly energy before a pair of figures stepped through it, its surface rippling like water in a pond. Thor. Superman. The god of thunder half-shouted in greetings. Heimdall sends his thanks, these portals of yours have made his task much easier. He hath placed one in Stark Tower that I may travel twixt Asgard and Midgard with but a single pace. He hath agreed with thee on thine concept of creating more. It felt interesting. The white-haired woman behind Thor said. You must be Kal of the House of El. I am EIR and it is an honor to meet you. The honor is mine. Clark said with a bow. Welcome to the fortress. EIR nodded, then looked around in curiosity. This place is quite different from Asgard. Asgard uses metallic alloys compared to Krypton using crystalline circuitry. Clark noted as he picked up the large trunk that Thor had been carrying. The medical bay is this way, we are still setting up for the revival. Forge is almost salivating at the chance to work with Asgardian technology. Our technology is such that others call it magic. EIR noted. Of all in the universe, the Kryptonians were closest in what they could achieve, but they took a different path to us. Well, hopefully we can come up with something. Clark shrugged. Anyway, until we actually start the process, there is no rush. Seems 'tis almost like the Odin sleep, save that it simply holds rather than rejuvenates. Thor noted. Clark thought about the statement, then nodded. An interesting view. Since I don't really know much about this Odin sleep, I can't really comment. He looks so young. EIR said as she gazed into the crystalline capsule. He's about the same age as Multiple. Clark said almost absently as he and Forge worked on one of the consoles. You know, you have a really odd programming system here, using Trinary with an offset base 9 overlay and multi-wave transmission patterns. How in blazes did you come up with it? It refers to the 9 worlds linked by the Yggdrasil. Thor said. Forge gave a querying look and Thor expanded his explanation. You know of my home Asgard, which sits at the apex. Below that is Alfheim, then this world, Midgard. Around Midgard are arrayed Jotunhelm, Muspelheim, Vanahelm, and Niflheim, then below them are Svartalfheim and finally Helhelm. Wow. Forge managed after a moment, then his attention was wrenched back to the board before him. And, we have a link up, the translation protocols are solid and working. Files have transferred successfully. EIR, if you would check your equipment. EIR looked up, then walked over to where a floating golden sphere rotated in a 3-pronged stand. Holding her hand over it, she examined the projected runes and images that hovered around her before nodding. This end doth seem secure. Thor, if thou wouldst step back. Thor nodded and quickly moved towards the entrance. Mine skills lie in combat and war, not the healing of flesh and bone. EIR nodded and moved to one side of the chamber as Jean Grey, hands showing evidence of prolonged scrubbing, took position on the other side. Sun lamps. Several banks of illumination activated and Jean nodded. Scanners are ready. We're picking up some minor kryptonite traces, so Clark, you may need to move back a bit. Clark nodded and stepped back, then he glanced at the large window where almost half the students had congregated, along with several of the adults. All ready? Jean asked and everyone in the room nodded even as Thor joined the crowd on the other side of the window, exchanging greetings with Piotr. EIR. I am ready. EIR said, staring into the globe which was spinning so fast that it was almost a blur. Stasis field is disengaging in 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. Forge stated and then the capsule's top split with the sides folding down and away, leaving the boy on a flat padded surface. For an instant, no one moved, then Connell opened his eyes and screamed in pain. Vitals are dropping. Jean shouted. Significant unknown crystalline deposits detected that are endangering him. EIR reported at the same time and Clark swore, then he hit a control on his panel. Kitty, the separation exercise, have you mastered it yet? Yeah, pretty much, but what? Kitty stammered and Clark motioned for her to enter. The field's down, get in here. We need you to pull the kryptonite out of him. Kitty inhaled sharply, then her expression firmed and she strode forwards, passing through the window. Half running to the writhing boy's side, she placed her hand on his torso, then her hand sank into his body and emerged with several specks of green. I need something to put this into. On it. Forge shouted, rummaging through the cupboards before throwing a metal container at her. Jean caught it in midair and levitated it to by Kitty's side, just in time to catch the first handful of kryptonite granules. Cellular bioshielding has yet to initiate, I'll try to give you warning. Clark stated and Kitty nodded as she passed her hand through Connell's head, removing another few dozen specks of kryptonite. Vitals starting to stabilize. Jean announced and EIR looked up from the floating runes. The next largest mass is in his lower abdomen. Thanks. Kitty responded even as her hand moved to collect the crystals that were endangering the life of the youngest Kryptonian. He'll be all right. EIR breathed in relief as the readings displayed on the screen above the capsule all finally turned green. The revival was a success. Yes, it was. Clark breathed in relief. But the other's skin is having higher levels of kryptonite poisoning. If we came this close to losing him, I will take a sample of this kryptonite, back to Asgard and see if there is any way that it can be rendered harmless. EIR stated as she lightly brushed the forehead of the sleeping boy. Kitty nodded as she pressed her hand lightly against his stomach, then she looked up. He's immune to me now, just like you and Kara. Thank you, Kitty. Clark breathed. You saved him. Kitty blushed and scurried towards the window, only to bounce off it. Ow. Hey. Sorry. Clark grinned. But the door is over there. Kitty stuck her tongue out at him before walking to the door with as much dignity as she could muster. As the door hissed open, Kitty found herself being hugged by Martha. Thank you. Thank you. It's I. Martha gave a trembling laugh, then released the young girl. You did a brilliant job, Kitty. I'm going to make your favorites for tea. Really? Kitty squealed. Thank you. You deserve it for saving my newest nephew. Martha chuckled as she led the excited girl away. Now, why don't we let him recover? Once Jean does her thing to give him English, you'll be able to talk to him. You're late. Superman blinked at the accusation, then turned to look down at Laura. What do you mean, I'm late? You come every other morning. This is afternoon. Clark blinked a couple of times, then he shrugged. I had some important business to take care of. How are you feeling? Laura seemed to stare into space for a moment before replying. Calmer. Don't know why. No longer want to kill you because instructions say so. Well, that's... Clark started before Laura interrupted him. Want to kill you because you are annoying. And because you placed me on island that doesn't exist. Clark blinked a few times. What do you mean by that? Radio picks up programs from all around world. Gives time. Matched time to position of sun and stars. Should be just inland of New York. This island is far out to sea with no New York. Either New York gone, 100 radio programs wrong, or island not what it seems. New York still around 3 weeks ago. Radio programs from New York on radio. A very good deduction. Clark smiled and Laura growled at him again. This island does indeed not exist as you know it, but it is real enough. We are keeping you here until we think that you can be released and not go on an instant rampage. Laura growled again and stalked off. Clark put the new box of supplies on the rock and picked up the old box before rising into the air. I'll see you in a couple of days then. A growl was his only answer. Where am I? Safe. A voice said, and Connell slowly opened his eyes, squinting as he forced the blinding glare to resolve. Soon, he saw a blonde teenager sat by his bed. You're probably thirsty. Here, have some water. The blonde said, and Connell allowed the blonde to raise him to a sitting position and help him take a few sips from a beaker. Who are you? I'm Alex, one of the students here. You're at the Xavier Institute and your cousins have been informed that you're awake. We've been taking it in turns to watch over you while you recovered. You almost died during the revival. Cousins? Connell asked, focusing on the most important part of the sentence, and Alex laughed. Yep, they should be on their way back. They were helping a group of heroes called the Avengers on a mission that ended a couple of hours ago. They're Clark Kent, I think you knew him as Kall, and Kara Zor-El. Kara's awake. Connell smiled and Alex nodded. Yep, she's part of the Avengers, but she visits whenever she can. Clark teaches here, so you'll get to see him a lot. But Kall's a baby. Connell said in confusion. I helped Kara change his nappies. But I grew up. A new voice said, and Connell gaped at the tall, muscular man in the ceremonial Kryptonian Defense Force uniform. Behind him was a more familiar face. Kara. Hey, Con. Kara grinned as she darted forwards and hugged him. Welcome back, little cousin. Thanks. Con replied as he hugged Kara, then he looked at the other Kryptonian. Kall. At the man's nod, Con cocked his head quizzically. You were a baby when I saw you before. I've had a few decades on Earth to grow up while you were asleep. Here on Earth, I go by the name of Clark of the family Kent. I was adopted soon after I arrived. I'll introduce you to my mum soon. Connell nodded, then he frowned. We're not speaking Kryptonian. How? I know a telepath. Clark smiled. While you were asleep, she placed knowledge of this language in your mind. You can still speak and understand Kryptonian, though hashtag. Yes, I can hashtag, Connell said, then he grinned. Wow. Amazing. Any other languages, you'll have to learn the longer way, though. Clark explained. I don't want to risk damaging your mind, especially after all we went through to save you. Stop teasing him. Kara commanded, giving Khan another hug. We have some clothes for you to wear, and a training uniform for when you learn to use your powers. Powers? Connell asked. What do you mean, powers? Clark paused for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his face. You won't develop them all at once, assuming that your development is anything like mine is, but I can tell you now that you have got the enhanced strength and effective invulnerability that Kara and I both have. As for the other powers, well, they'll activate as you grow older. Things like super speed and enhanced senses first, then the more active powers such as heat vision and flight. Connell's eyes widened in wonder as Clark continued his explanations as to what he could expect in the future. The dining room seemed to erupt in cheers and applause as Clark escorted Connell into the room. Connell looked up at Clark, gaining reassurance from the grin that the elder Kryptonian bestowed upon him. After a moment, Clark waved for silence and everyone slowly sat down again. All right, everyone. I would like to formally introduce our newest member of the Institute to those of you who have yet to meet him. This is Connell. He has agreed to let me adopt him as my son, Christopher Kent. Since I see that Mystique has brought the Brotherhood over for this occasion, I will introduce them first. Let me, Clark. Mystique smiled as she rose, briefly changing to her Raven Darkholm form. I am Mystique, I'm a shapeshifter. Cool. Connell breathed, then his expression changed. Are you the one who's dating my dad? Mystique froze, then glared at the sniggering teens near her. Your dad. I offered to adopt him. Clark shrugged and Mystique sighed. In that case, yes. She said. Yes, I am. He's one of the few who simply doesn't want me for what I can look like. Chris nodded slowly in understanding. Now, let me introduce my students. First we have Chapter 19, Weapon. The weapon is in the Xavier Institute. Bolivar Trask frowned slightly as he looked at the face on the screen which Garden Creed was talking to. Although he recognized the face as belonging to a member of S.H.I.E.L.D., he didn't remember the name. That could potentially be very useful. Creed smirked. I was wondering how best to dispose of that particular nest of filth. Is there a supply of the kill scent available? And can it be detected by humans? Trask cocked his head in curiosity as the person on the screen nodded. How much did you need? And it is designed to be totally undetectable except by X-23. Enough to cover the Xavier Institute for up to 3 days. Creed smirked. That should be more than long enough, and then the weapon will be exhausted and ours to claim. The kill scent will be delivered tomorrow to the drop-off point. The person said. Humanity will prevail. Humanity will prevail. Creed replied and the screen went black. Sir. You are worried that I will not need the Sentinel project once this nest of mutants is wiped out? Creed asked with a smile. Trask, the Sentinels are the foundation of our plan to protect humanity. Having a trained mutant assassin under our command will help us to expose the mutant threat and raise public demand for us to do something about it. And with the greatest concentration of mutants in America wiped out by one of their own, an event we can capitalize on to demonstrate the danger of mutantkind, our task of purifying the human race will be much, much simpler. For a moment, Trask didn't respond, then a slow smirk grew on his face. Sir, you are brilliant. I know, Bolivar. Creed said. But so are you. I couldn't have done even a tenth of what you have achieved with Sentinels, even 100th. Do not underestimate yourself, my friend. We all serve the cause of true humanity, each in our own way. Laura. X-23 looked up as Superman landed in front of her. Do you still want to kill me? Clark smiled and Laura shook her head slowly. No. You are annoying, but I don't want to. I don't understand. Then you have taken the hardest step to reclaiming your humanity. Clark smiled, offering his hand to her. You have the chance to return to the wider world, Laura. Are you ready, or do you wish more time here? Laura stared at him and Clark lowered himself to one knee, looking into her eyes. I know that making a decision that will change your life is hard. I hesitated when I was offered a chance to join the Institute and teach those coming into their powers. Teaching them to control their abilities, to use them to help others, to teach them that having powers did not mean that they were no longer human. Am I human? Laura asked quietly and Clark nodded. You are. You are human. No matter what you were told by those who controlled you in the past, you are human. You are Laura, the daughter of Logan. Flesh of his flesh and bone of his bone. He is waiting to meet you, Laura, to welcome you. Will you give him a chance? Will you give yourself a chance? Laura stood almost motionless for several minutes and Clark simply waited. His patience was rewarded when she slowly nodded. I will come. Clark gently took her hand even as he touched a small control on his belt, causing an archway to appear. The island will always be here for you, should you need to retreat to recover. Clark said as the doors of the arch opened to reveal an illuminated passageway. Just before the threshold, Laura paused and looked up at Clark again. It is a big step. Clark whispered to her. There is no shame in waiting until you feel more able. No. I can do this. Laura whispered, then her voice firmed. I can do this. Taking a deep breath, Laura stepped onto the border, then looked back. It will be here? For me. For whenever you need it. Clark confirmed. Promise. Promise. Laura inhaled deeply and nodded, taking a final step through the doorway. If you're ready, I'll start introducing you to the others here. All right. So, everyone has met Laura, where is she? She wanted to return to the island for the night. Clark said and Xavier nodded in understanding. Of course. The Institute can be somewhat overwhelming at first. May smiled as she accepted a cookie from the plate being passed around. I mean, when I saw 5 young Jamies running around, I was almost convinced that I'd gone mad. I've been here from almost the start, and I still have days when I think I'm dreaming. Martha smiled, then she fixed Clark with a fierce look. And then my son turns me into a grandmother. Clark started sputtering denials and explanations before he caught the slight twitch at the corners of his mother's mouth. Leaning back in his chair, he glared at her. So, when are you going to marry Raven? Martha added and Clark blinked before blushing. You two do get along very well, you know. After all, her skin nicely complements your jumpsuit. A bark of laughter from Logan distracted them and Clark gave him a gimlet stare. What? Logan asked with a grin. I find it funny, that's all. You and your sense of humor. Aurora mourned, even though everyone could see that she was trying not to grin. So, what's Superboy got? Logan asked. Can he fly? Not at the moment. Martha answered with a smile. He's got super strength and invulnerability, plus his eyesight is getting the extra modes. Of course, Clark didn't discover that he could fly until he was 15. And what he did to the tree. Mom! Clark half shouted. Please. What? Christopher accidentally knocked down a tree this morning. Martha laughed. What did you think I meant? Speaking of, where is he? May asked and Clark grinned. He fell asleep in Rogue's lap. He's immune to her powers too. I'll move them to their beds after this meeting. Nice that she has another person she can touch. Martha smiled. You, Kara and now Christopher. Yeah, shame that Peter, Forge and myself aren't making any real progress in finding a way to switch her power off, though. Clark sighed. I know that we're overlooking something that'll have us slapping ourselves because of how stupid we've been in missing it, but I just can't work out what it is. Forge and Peter agree with me on that, it's driving us nuts. I thought you already were. Logan snarked and Clark glared at him again before Martha reached over and slapped Logan's head. Don't make fun of my son like that. That's my job. Sorry, ma'am. Logan smirked and Clark sighed, rubbing his forehead. Is this pick on Clark Day? A brief scratching of nib on paper caused him to sigh, and then he heard a thin pad of paper landing on the table. Look at that, Logan said in faked exaggerated shock as he stared at the calendar. It really is. Clark sighed and glanced round, seeing May trying to hide a smile. Et2, Parker. Sir, the canisters have been placed and primed. Creed looked up from the paperwork he was poring over. Excellent. And the weather report? The wind will be most favorable by 0800 tomorrow morning, and should hold until Monday evening at the least. 2.5 days, plenty of time. Creed nodded. Trask, once again, you have done well. Contact your people in the local police to get them ready to investigate and get your other agents into position. Have them spy on the Institute until we can confirm that at least half the mutants are deceased, or the weapon has been neutralized. As you command, sir. Bolivar said with a bow. Good morning. Martha smiled as the first few students entered the kitchen. Breakfast is being made, so have a seat and help yourself to tea or coffee. Good morning, Anna, how did you sleep? Very well. Rogue said with a slight blush. Clark carried you to bed after you fell asleep. Martha said, and Christopher peeped round the younger girl. Morning, Gran. Morning, Chris. Martha smiled. Did you sleep well? Christopher nodded, then yawned slightly. Hungry? I am too. Another voice said, and Martha smiled at the new arrival. Good morning, Laura. Laura. Rogue echoed, turning slightly. You're Logan's daughter? Laura nodded, and Rogue smiled at her. I'd shake hands, but ma pow means I ain't able to touch others. Except for Clark, Laura, and now Chris. Martha smiled as Chris almost towed Rogue to the table, a bemused Laura following. As they sat down, Martha placed a plate of pancakes in front of each one, smiling as Rogue and Chris promptly voiced their thanks. Laura sat down on Chris' other side and took a small taste of the pancakes before her. Her eyes widened and she quickly took a second bite, then a third. I think she lost it. Rogue smirked and Laura nodded, then Chris frowned. What's that smell? Smell? Martha asked curiously. I don't smell anything odd. It's getting stronger and... Laura, your heartbeat's getting faster. I. Laura started, then she froze. Kill scent. Oh hell. Martha cursed, causing Rogue to look at her in shock. Chris. Grab her and hold her. Rogue, get to the professor and warn him. Rogue nodded and sprinted out of the room as Chris grabbed Laura and pulled her into a tight hug. No. I'll hurt you. Laura protested as she struggled, and Martha shook her head even as she made sure she was out of range. Chris is Clark's son and he already has strength and invulnerability. He'll be able to hold you until Clark gets back. Laura froze for a moment, then she wrapped her arms around Chris and buried her face against the side of his neck. Everyone else, run. She whispered as she fought to overcome the rising rage that threatened to consume her. I'm here. Laura, let's get you to what? Clark froze at the sight of Laura hugging Chris tightly, then he looked across to where Xavier was sat watching the pair. Sir. It's quite fascinating. Charles smiled. It would seem that Chris' natural scent somehow counteracts the effects of the kill scent. I had the fortress scan the area for the source of the gas and I sent the others out to retrieve the devices releasing it. For a long moment, Clark simply stared at Charles, then he started to chuckle. You mean that my son is the cure for the induced rage? It certainly seems that way. Xavier nodded. The fortress is filtering out as much of the kill scent as possible, but some of it is lingering. With your permission, I shall assign Laura to watch over Chris and vice versa. Hey, Chuck. Logan growled as he walked in. We got all those canisters you wanted collecting, sealed them up and placed them in storage. Whoa, kid. Got yourself an older girlfriend? Dunno how I feel about you going after my daughter. Chris gave Logan a glare. You are so lucky that I can't do the heat vision thing yet. Logan chuckled, then looked round. Oh, Fury called. He asked if we needed reinforcements. He had the Avengers ready to deploy. Seems that one of his people went rogue a while ago and they only just found out about him. Went rogue? Martha, Charles, and Clark queried and Logan snorted. Greek chorus. I'll fill you in once we've all had breakfast, but the short version is that someone out there knows about us and is trying to expose us and wipe us out. That's what the gas was about. It was meant to trigger Laura into a berserk fury. You alright, kid? Laura nodded slightly, although she didn't lift her face from the crook of Chris' neck. Logan frowned a bit, then his eyes widened in realization. Smells good, does he? Another nod was his answer and Logan smirked. Well, the fortress says we've still got some of the gas floating around. It'll be another half hour until the inside is completely clean. Storm is working on blowing away the traces outside. Keep hugging him till then. You okay with that, Flyboy Jr.? Flyboy Jr.? Chris protested and Clark sighed. He calls me Flyboy and you're my son now. I think it was inevitable. A light giggling distracted them and Clark smiled as he saw Laura's shoulders shake as she tried to hold in her laughter. What happened? Creed growled and Trask shrugged. I don't know, sir. We managed to get an image relayed of their dining area where the weapon was restrained in the arms of a young boy. We think that he must have used his mutant powers to restrain the weapon, and then Superman showed up. We lost most of the kill scent, only managed to retrieve 3 canisters before the mutants rushed out and seized the devices. Creed growled, then he closed his eyes and inhaled deeply several times. All right. It isn't your fault. If anything, it was mine. I was unaware of the full capabilities of the mutants in the Institute and one of them was enough to counter the weapon. At least it was only a strike of opportunity and not a long-term plan gone wrong. Yes, sir. So, anything else? Yes, sir. Trask said, passing a file over. We have located a second, smaller grouping of mutants in Bayville, a group that call themselves the Brotherhood. Their leader was spotted in Japan a while ago, meeting the Henshin Rangers along with Superman. Creed glanced at the picture, then he stared at it, his face twisted in a mask of fury. Mystique. Sir. For a long moment, the only movements Creed made were the quivering of his hands, then he snarled. That thing is Mystique, a shapeshifter. When it is time to release the Sentinels, I want a group to target that house and to destroy it and all of its occupants. I want it leveled, burned, and the ashes sown with salt. Am I clear? Perfectly, sir. Trask replied quickly, making a mental note to review all the data that had been collected on Mystique. It would seem that Garden Creed's hatred of mutants was more than it seemed. Chapter 20, Discovery. Thank God that you're all right. Fury said, and on the screen Charles raised a querying eyebrow. We've managed to get some information. As much as I hate to admit it, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been infiltrated. What? Xavier asked and Fury nodded. They call themselves Friends of Humanity. We assumed that they were just an anti-powers group or something like that, but between the interrogation of their mole who leaked the existence of the kill scent and the investigation I ordered, we have trouble. What sort of trouble? Charles asked and Fury tapped a few controls, bringing up a window showing a blurred mechanical figure. One of my long-term deep cover operatives managed to relay this to me. The Friends of Humanity are building, the only way to describe them is hunter-killer robots designed to track mutants and eliminate them. But the existence of mutants is not that well known. Xavier pointed out. If anything, any attempt along those lines that they make will simply cause sympathy for the mutant cause. It would, if they weren't planning on doing something first to make mutants seem like a threat. Fury countered. My source couldn't find out what they were going to do, only that they have a mutant ready to cause a lot of damage before they use the Sentinels to destroy it and claim the moral high ground. I shall warn my team and have them ready to intercept the mutant as soon as we can find its location. Fury nodded, then he glanced over to where one of the bridge crew was frantically waving at him and pointing at the screen. Oh hell. The Avengers are still dealing with the fallout of the debacle with the Mandarin and my commandos are investigating another of Magneto's reported bases. How fast can your team deploy? Xavier's eyes widened. What's going on? The giant solid energy monster screamed in rage as it clawed against a skyscraper, sending chunks of rubble tumbling down to the road below. Creed leaned back in his chair, watching the events unfold on his wall screen. And we have received a message from the acolytes of Magneto that this is merely the first such attack that will take place until mutant superiority is recognized. The reporter shouted even as another barrage of rubble cratered the street. I wonder how Magneto is taking this. Creed mused with a chuckle. Releasing a fake statement using the name of a mutant who wants to fight was probably one of my better moves. Indeed it was, sir. Trask said from behind him. We have deployed the Sentinels to their launch points and simply await your command. Excellent. Creed smirked. But let us allow this situation to develop a bit more. After all, it would be useful to have some martyrs for our cause. As you say, sir. Trask agreed. What? Magneto raged, his attention transfixed on the screen. Someone dares to use my name. So this is not your doing. Another voice said, and Magneto glanced at the armored man in the green cloak who lounged on the high-tech throne at the focal point of the large hall. It would seem that someone is trying to force you into taking action before you are truly ready. I know. Magneto growled. I cannot reach New York in time to do anything to counter this. So use it in your favor, instead. Victor Von Doom replied. It would seem that the existence of mutants is no longer a secret to the people of the world. But an unprovoked attack on America. Magneto started to retort, then he paused and slowly a smirk formed on his face. Means that many countries will be eager to embrace the mutant cause since it has already caused so much damage to America. Much of the Middle East, for instance. See? Already you are planning on using this to your advantage. Doom said, his smirk hidden behind his helmet. Remember my price for aid. You must deliver the Invisible Woman to me. Susan will be mine. That is the will of Doom, and in Latveria, Doom's will is law. Indeed. Magneto muttered as he turned his attention back to the screen. Coming around. Storm noted even as a thunk announced Clark's exit from the plane. A second thunk a few seconds later told her that Sunspot had also deployed, and she pulled up slightly as the red and blue shape and the dark figure with the yellow aura raced ahead to where the red glowing monster was savaging a fourth skyscraper. We need to help evacuate the area. She stated even as the plane dived towards an open area, its landing gear extended. The professors tried to get into the mind of that thing, but something is blocking it. We ready? Piotr rumbled. I help take down. Others cover civilians until area clear. Try not to endanger yourselves. Cyclops stated as Storm landed the Blackbird and popped the hatch. All right, X-Men. Let's move. Nightcrawler, you know what to do. J.A. Kurt agreed as he vanished in a cloud of smoke. And Superman has shown up, along with a new hero. The reporter babbled as he looked down on the rampage from his position in the news helicopter. The new hero is blasting at the monster, and a second beam of red has lanced up from the ground. Cyclops has arrived, and more beams are lancing up. We have new heroes facing off against that monster. Sykes, we have just received information from the X-Men about the new heroes. The news anchor interrupted. The flying hero is Sunspot while the second energy projector is Havoc. His powers are similar to those of Cyclops. And Supergirl has just arrived. The reporter shouted excitedly. I am seeing movement on the ground. It looks like more heroes have arrived and are helping to evacuate the civilians. Lightning. The monster just got hit by two blasts of lightning, one from the ground and one from the air, making it stagger backwards. That would apparently be Storm and Berserker. The anchor supplied, looking at the crystalline pad that had been dropped on her desk a moment earlier by a blue-furred being who had appeared and vanished again in a cloud of smoke. Storm can command the weather while Berserker can generate large amounts of electricity. I can't really see what's going on, but there are two chrome figures down there. They're throwing rubble at the monster. 2. The news anchor queried. Only one is listed here, Colossus. Who is the second one? Rogue grunted as she hurled a piece of concrete the size of a car at the towering energy beast. You doing good? Colossus noted as he hurled a piece of debris, catching the monster on its jaw. You use my power almost as well as I do. Thanks. Rogue shouted as she punched away a falling chunk of wall. How do we stop this thing? Not sure. Colossus replied as he punched one of the toes of the beast, causing it to roar and try to stamp him. This thing very solid. Solid. Rogue gasped, then she hit her communicator even as a stream of explosive plasmoids lanced out to strike the beast on its chest. I have a plan, but I need Kitty and a flyer to help me. Looking up, Rogue leapt backwards, rolling back to her feet as the foot of the monster slammed down just where she had been standing. We're here. Kara's voice said and Rogue nodded. Kitty, I need to borrow ya powers, then Kara, you throw me into that thing. So you can knock out the person inside. Kara realized even as Kitty reached out to grab Rogue's metal arm. Brilliant. Kitty, get toss off Edie. Rogue commanded as Kitty staggered back. Supergirl, do it. Kitty watched as Kara and Rogue rocketed upwards, then several huge shapes passed overhead. What the hell? With a roar of jets, 11 of the figures landed around the energy monster and opened fire in a synchronized movement, hammering it from all sides. The 12th figure stepped back, its eyes glowing as it observed the events, then the monster lashed out and its claws slashed straight through one of the attackers before it hurled the now sparking figure away. The other figures promptly backed away in unison, maintaining their barrage, then the beast lunged and speared another two. The sentinels are falling, Trask. Yes sir. It allows the public to see just how dangerous mutants are. Trask replied calmly. Once half of them have fallen, the Decanus will send the signal that switches off the power amplifier attached to the mutant, allowing it to be destroyed. For a moment, Creed thought about what had been said, then he nodded slowly. An excellent plan, Bolivar. Truly excellent. Thank you, sir. Gritting her teeth, Rogue forced her way through the semi-solid energy construct which was being illuminated by the beams impacting on its surface. Above her, she could make out the shape of a young girl writhing in agony, a machine attached to her back and head. Redoubling her effort, she reached out and managed to grab her. Using her newfound handhold, she pulled herself up behind the girl and grabbed the machine. What? Creed gasped as the monster seemed to flicker out of existence. The sentinels all paused as the Decanus recalculated the situation and the camera zoomed in to show Superman and Kara catching two falling figures. I thought that the signal would not be sent until another sentinel was destroyed. It wasn't, sir. Trask replied, looking at a datapad. It would seem that one of the mutants managed to penetrate the monster field and destroyed the machine. Creed glanced at the proffered image and growled at the sight of the metallic girl with her fist cocked ready to strike. Pull the sentinels back and contact Senator Kelly. He growled. I want as much publicity about dangerous mutants as I can get before we dispatch the sentinels to perform the purge. Yes sir. Creed leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. This is only a minor setback, Bolivar. Your sentinels performed admirably, but it would seem that now is not yet the time for them to be used as they should be. We will continue with politics for now. As you command, sir. Trask murmured before he left the room. Creed continued to stare at the screen. Soon, all mutants will be wiped out. I just need to wait for the perfect moment to unleash my sentinels. And this is the remains of the machine that was used to control and overcharge the powers of the girl in question. Superman said, motioning to a collection of pieces displayed on a folding table. We have discovered that she was kidnapped over a fortnight ago and held prisoner by parties unknown until she was used for this attack. As such, I have had her taken to a safe place where she will receive medical attention to ensure that she is free of any technology that might be used by those who wish for a repeat of today's tragedy. The screen blinked off and the young Japanese girl looked round at the red-haired woman smiling down at her. Welcome back. My name is Jean Grey and you are safe here. May I know your name? Ichiki. Hisako. Where? The Xavier Institute for the Gifted. Jean replied. Rogue managed to disable the machine that was controlling you and we brought you here to recover. If you want, I can try to contact your family to tell them that you're safe. Hisako nodded slightly and Jean smiled. Good. We scanned you while you were unconscious and apart from severe physical exhaustion, you're alright. Once you feel better, you can get up but for now, get some rest. You need it. Hisako nodded and closed her eyes, succumbing once more to sleep. Congratulations, my students. Xavier smiled at the assembled throng. Your first full field deployment and you all did marvelously. For a couple of moments, the Xavier simply smiled as the cheers, applause and congratulatory backslaps and high fives echoed, then he held up his hand for their attention once again. The media, thanks to the group calling itself the Friends of Humanity, has latched onto the existence of mutant kind and are asking questions. Many of them are taking the position that we are a threat to society, a position being repeated and shaped by Senator Kelly, amongst others. For now, I must ask you to be extremely careful in the use of your powers outside the Institute. We are at a tipping point, and if things go the wrong way. A thoughtful hush descended, then Kurt raised his hand. Professor, why did you have me take that tablet to the newsreaders? It was part of Clark's plan to counter the negative publicity of the attack. Xavier said with a slight smile. By getting your codenames into the public eye, he has set it up so that the general public will think about us in much the same way as they think about the Avengers. Hey, check this out. Peter looked across, then his eyes widened at the image on the screen. What the? Yeah. Forge said, looking at the sentinel head that had been linked up to various diagnostic tools. That thing can detect an active X gene. But, how? Peter asked and Forge raised one arm, transforming it to its technological state. Let's open it up and find out. Check the description for the links to the author.